That's good.
God doesn't ordain it.
You see yourself?
All right, good morning. Welcome to the 11th of February already. So we're rapidly approaching, well, we'll be halfway this week through February. So February is also rapidly going. So we are currently on page 270, Emptying the Tomb. So I want to jump forward a couple of pages though, just to talk for a moment, and then we'll go back to this. If you look at page 274, because we're covering all of these things about the resurrection, and we're covering, sorry, we still have some more to cover, but on 274, you'll see three important questions about the resurrection. You know, what is the resurrection of Christ? What is the evidence that the resurrection occurred, and why is the resurrection important? So, you know, as we finish up with this, and then I think next week we'll be at this point, those three questions every Christian should be able to answer thoroughly. And the reason is, this is why Christ came, for his sacrifice, death, and resurrection. And so why, you know, and why is the resurrection important? And so these are questions, though, the last portion of the chapter will cover. And it is also questions, as we're going through this, that you want to be able to answer, because when you're witnessing or talking to somebody, then that's a natural, why is it so important that Jesus died? Why is it important that he rose? Why, you know, so those are questions that really are important to your witness to somebody. And so you need to understand it so that you can talk to somebody else about it. So now we're back on page 270, emptying the tomb, and we see that in Matthew and Mark. So the Bible never gives a full description of the event of the resurrection. So that's okay, because the Bible doesn't, like we say, it doesn't tell us everything we want to know. It tells us everything we need to know. And so with that, it is not surprising that here too, there isn't one book. I mean, you could have one book dedicated just to what all occurred at the resurrection. So here we have what's important for us to know. So it emphasizes that the tomb was empty and the disciples met the risen Lord. So the event took place near dawn on Sunday, after Jesus' burial on Friday. The outward manifestations of the resurrection include an earthquake, the appearance of an angel, the moving of the stone sealing the tomb. And so it says the reality of the event is shown by the paralyzing fright of the normally hardened, tough guards. So we do have some information, not only that Jesus arose, but we have information that addresses, wasn't he in a sealed tomb? Yes. And the tomb was open. Weren't there guards watching him? Yes. And this is what happened to that portion. So the story does address some of these questions, and that's what we'll go further into. So the response of the women, and we see that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So it has a sentence that starts, it's impossible to unravel fully the differences of the details in the four Gospels as they report the resurrection. The variety of the details points to the opinions of several eyewitnesses and shows us that the Gospel writers made no effort to present a unified report. This fact provides a firmer basis for believing the truthfulness of the report. So they didn't get together and harmonize and then say the same thing in all four books. So what they did is they were led by the Spirit to present facts, and those facts are within the presentation of the story that they're telling. So it is not, it is fact, it's likely that if with four different stories, some facts will overlap and other writers will include facts that maybe the other two or three didn't. So that is really not a problem, because if we tell a story ourselves, then depending on the audience is also going to drive what facts you put. If you're writing to a Jewish audience or to a Gentile audience. So we have all four books in which to look at to get the fullest picture. And so it says, perhaps John's report of the visit by Mary Magdalene in chapter 20, verse 1, describes a visit she made alone before sunrise. She may have returned later with the other women as the sun was rising in Matthew 28:1. Matthew and Mark mention only a single angel at the tomb, but Luke mentions that there were two present. The women came to the tomb questioning who would remove the stone to allow them access to this tomb in Mark 16:3. God had already handled the object of their concern, and they reacted with fear, joy, confusion, and disbelief. So, and that just moving of the stone is something to think about. Here they are going, and their concern is, how are they now going to properly take care of the body now that the weekend is over and there's this big stone in place? What are we going to do? And so when they go there, what they thought was a problem wasn't a problem. It was already taken care of. But then there's no Jesus. So the women's words about the empty tomb spurred Peter and John to dash away to investigate the incident themselves. And then it says the more youthful John won the race, but he remained outside the tomb gazing intently inside. And Peter rushed into the tomb. What did they see?
Right. Yeah. And there's an angel inside the tomb, correct?
Well, we're going to see. But one of the things, and we're going to get a comparison between when Lazarus rose and when Jesus rose. How, even though they both raised from the dead, they raised different, right? So here we have the burial cloth, which had covered Jesus' head, was rolled up and left in a corner as if the original user no longer needed it. So, and we can safely contrast the appearance here that at Lazarus' resurrection. Lazarus came out of the tomb with his grave clothes clinging to his body, right? Jesus, he came and left the grave coverings behind. And that's where we see they were folded up. And so even in his resurrection from the dead, it is different than Lazarus, who was Jesus called out, and he came out still dressed, still in his burial attire, if you will. And Jesus doesn't come out that way. John believed in the resurrection on the basis of the empty tomb, but both disciples left the tomb disappointed in John 20:10. Mary sees Jesus in Matthew, Mark, and John. The major focus of these verses is Jesus' appearance to Mary. As Mary stood in grief near the tomb, Jesus spoke to her. She recognized him only when he uttered her name. Apparently, and then it has a comment that, she fell to her knees, right, and clung to Jesus. And we have what Jesus said to her in verse 20:17, and they're saying it probably suggested in normal type talk for us today, stop clinging to me. I am not yet in the ascended state, and I am not about to disappear permanently. Because now you see Jesus, you're not going to want to let Jesus go.
Right.
And right, yeah, because he was dead, now he's back. And so that would be I'm not going to let Jesus out of my sight. So bribing the guards in Matthew. Now here we have Matthew has this story. And so who is Matthew's audience to?
Other believers.
Well, but it is written from a Jewish perspective, right?
Yes.
It has lineage, it has all,
Yes.
so it is not surprising that Matthew goes back and addresses those chief priests, right? So the story suggested by the chief priest was an insult to the guards and potentially dangerous to their health and well-being. So if you are a guard and you're a Roman and the order came from on high to guard the tomb, and now the story is going to be, and then we fell asleep. That's, you probably only get to say that story once during your career.
You're not gonna get another.
Yeah, and your career ends, right? So that's going to be a problem. The priests were so desperate to conceal the absence of Jesus' body that they failed to consider the improbability that the guards would sleep through a grave robbery. First, would go to sleep.
Right.
Then, as a group, like, just we'll just go to sleep.
Yeah, don't take shifts.
Stone. And so now the grave robbers would have to come, have to move the stone, and no one wakes up,
Quietly.
right? No, because if you wake up, you're going to kill the grave robbers. And at the same time, they know what occurred during their slumber. Right? So it's not a very good story. Now, think about this. Why did the priest want a story?
Right.
And they're willing to bribe, because that's what we're going to see. They're willing